Done.
Yeah, so I think that this topic is going to fill in perfectly after the talks you've had so far, because it's more of a fundamental topic that covers some of the issues that were actually mentioned by the speakers before me. And so a lot of them mentioned open data, and open data was like the introduction of open access data was a tremendous step forward in all kind of scientific research and collaboration. However, I just want to add here that there could be a step forward that's above the open access data, which is the fair data. And the main misconception here is that these two kinds of types of data are similar or the same, which they're not. Fair data doesn't need to be necessarily free access data, but it has some increased values of its own, which is in the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, which make the acronym of the fair data. And so why this is so important is because, as we've seen so far, many researchers have the issue of knowing which kind of data they need, but not knowing if it actually exists, or if it exists, where it could be found, or if it could be found, exactly how descriptive and informative it is. So to get to that point, it doesn't take any kind of special technical advances or any kind of additional effort. It's actually just a matter of the habits and the introduction of it as a culture, of just creating data in such a way that it could be reused and accessed by whoever wants to access it or needs to access it. So it needs to be found by humans or machines, and this is particularly important nowadays with the LLMs and upgraded research searching engines online that tend to find data based on specific identifiers, which could be added to any kind of data set or a metadata set that describes a certain type of data. And so it needs to be accessible and needs to be interoperable to conform to recognized formats. So it has to be easily accessible, easily openable in RStudio or any other kind of software that's publicly used. It's not in a specific foreign language. It has to be translated. It has to be ready to be used if the permission for it is accepted or granted. And it needs to be licensed and conferenced in a specific way so that if you do get access to it or you want to get access to it, you know exactly which laws it confines to. So for example, I don't come from an EU country, and for some specific data sets that could have been obtained in my country and that don't conform to EU laws, for example, I'm not saying I had this situation, but for example, if I did, and they posted that data set online and they didn't post a rich enough metadata set that explains the licensing behind it, and you use it in your research, it could potentially get you in trouble, or vice versa. So this kind of metadata explainability is extremely important for fair data, and that's why I'm proposing this topic right now. And so this is just to quickly glance over some of the typical things for the fair data sets, and then I'm going to go into an example of a metadata set that I'm referring to right now. So the persistent identifier is obviously a DOI, a digital object identifier, or a link, or a specific traceable connection to a repository or a network where you can access it, and it records it and keeps it for as long as that data set is at the network where it is. And so that ID has to be functional. It has to lead you when you use it to the exact data set or metadata set that you can use. And the importance here is on the metadata because the dataset doesn't have to be open access. It can be closed, it can be permitted, especially in biomedical and epidemiological data. It often is the case, as opposed to maybe sometimes meteorological data that is more open source to use, because the biomedical data usually refers to some specific sensitive information that shouldn't be disclosed to people without the access to it. But metadata should and is usually accessible, regardless of which data set it confers to. And it's impossible for it to be, because then we can kind of infer to what is within the data set, even if we don't have the permission to look at it. And so it also needs to have the controlled vocabulary, the controlled keywords. The variables need to be sorted in a specific way, translated with the references and the links provided to other related data sets. And this is where usually some issues happen, because the formatting or the common language is not organized in a specific way. And so the interoperability is usually the neglected part, but it's extremely important as well. And for the reusability, as I said, it needs to follow exact domain standards. It needs to conform to laws and so on, have the exact licensing that goes into it. And so here, I personally, I think the metadata here is the most important part of the story, because the data set itself nowadays often does confine to all of these metrics. However, it usually lacks the metadata set. And for example, we've heard talks already of the fact that some countries, some regions are very scarce in data. We don't know if it even exists, even though we need it. And perhaps, for example, some of the stories of the North Africa or the Mediterranean regions, maybe those countries and places do have the data sets, but we don't know where they are. And so, for example, I also struggled with this because I mean, I'm a junior researcher, I'm 25, but I had the situation where I needed a data set and I got it after a long search, a long period, but because I just didn't know it existed and I stumbled upon it by accident. And so if we have a good metadata setup, this isn't such an issue anymore because a metadata set doesn't need to be specifically modified, doesn't need to confine to any specific laws. It just has to have the descriptive capabilities to enable us to understand what is within the data set. And it's especially important in biomedical sciences and epidemiological sciences where these registries of categorical data pivotal for any kind of research without which we can't proceed. So this is just going over all the fair aspects of the data set, which should be and usually are listed within the metadata set with it. So it refers to a specific kind of data that it is. It's just a brief explanation, the identifier, the way you can access it, the contact information of people, the statistical information of the data set, whether quality control was performed, if it is, how it was performed, the statistical analysis, perhaps the gap filling. It's also quite popular in meteorological data management, but also epidemiological data management. What kind of analysis was done? So basically, it sets you up for anything you need once you get the data set, if you do get it, what you need to know, what you need to do in order to reproduce the steps of previous authors or use it for your own individual research. And so here, I just want to point out the main data set differences because I know not everyone here had the opportunity or the privilege to work with the biomedical data, but it's extremely messy, especially compared to climate data, which usually is it usually confines to the World Meteorological Organization standards. There's a daily scale of it's not weekly data, it's not monthly data, it's usually daily measurements, it's open access. It often is even fair, even if it wasn't deliberately made fair, it often is. It often does confine to those standards, but biomedical data doesn't really work like that because it's not the standards vary from institution to institution. So whoever collects the data basically follows their own standard and agenda, which doesn't need to exist at all. And because if it does contain sensitive information, it's usually just immediately labeled as closed access. It's usually just hidden somewhere, difficult to access. And it all, of course, isn't fair because there's no link to it, there's no identifier for it, there's no statistic behind it. It's just it just exists, and it's up to you to make the work to make it fair and make it reusable for others. And that's why I'm proposing this because, for example, the data set I worked with that I struggled to get, I would gladly share with someone. I'm not saying I can give you the full access to it, but if I give you the metadata set, we can collaborate and make a study out of it so we can together use it. And it's something that it's very important for regions where data scarcity is a real problem, such as where I come from in Serbia and many other regions as well, especially outside of the European Union. And so to make a biomedical data set fair, of course, you keep the closed access, but you can easily perform that by uploading the data set after you perform statistical analysis, after you translated all the variables to a repository and just keep the closed access to it and also do the metadata structuring. That's exactly what they did for the research project I did. So after this, I'll show you an example of a typical Word document that can serve as a metadata set that takes about 10 to 15 minutes to make if you actually participated in the data set stewardship, which I did. And so of course, I didn't reposit it yet because it's a work in progress. The study is ongoing, but once it does, it'll have the actual unique identifier. It will have the HTTPS link. I just put some random numbers and letters here just to because it doesn't exist yet, but this is what I would upload if I did. And that's just something, of course, I did add those paragraphs of description. I would not include them in the metadata set because it's more of a descriptive talk. I kept them in because I thought it was kind of, sorry. I thought it was important to include them. And so you can see all the theoretical parts I mentioned here playing their part. So this could be for any country or any town, any kind of metadata, any kind of biomedical data. This is just an example of what you could expect to find. And so the study was on the work-related absenteeism due to meteorological conditions and air quality variables such as air pollution in the Novi Sad area in Serbia. And so you know exactly where it's situated, during which period, calendar year of 2021, and it was built on from reports from primary care physicians. So if you needed some other kind of reporting, you know this data set is not for you. If you needed this one, you can contact us. The structural metadata behind it, you know, it's an Excel sheet. It's a small file. You can easily manage it. There's nothing complicated about it. It's exactly it's easy to use. It has an imaginary DOI, but it should have a real DOI. You see the variables, so you see the personal ID, which is the pseudonymization of each candidate, if each person within the data set, so no personal information other than that. And it doesn't mean anything outside of this particular data set. You know the gender, you know the diagnosis and what kind of nomenclature it was built upon and the cause of injury. So if you need any more information, if you're interested in some other aspect in hospitalizations, for example, you wouldn't find it here. If you want to do hospitalization research, such as in Cyprus, you wouldn't need this data set. It wouldn't work for you. But if you need just work-related absenteeism of any kind, this data set is perfect for you. And so if you want to focus on more on gender dispersion or the age categories or the way these people usually get sick or get injured, yeah, you can find information on that here. You can also see exactly what kind of data set this is. So no measurements. These are all per consultation observations. You know exactly where we got it from the Institute of Public Health. I still know actually who provided the data set, the name of the person. So it's just a random name, but it's someone who exists and who can be contacted, and he will be listed later on. You know which professor and under which grant ordered this data set, so you know which project was there was ongoing for this. You know it's an EU project, and for example, you can expect the licensing to go along with all the licensing and laws of the European Union, so you don't have to worry about that. And exactly, you can contact the study team that performed it. So this is just an easy to take in kind of an example of a fair metadata that goes with this data set. And this is just an example of how easy it is to make it and how useful it can be to other people. Because I know probably no one here is interested in doing a research on Novi Sad or in Serbia, but you can imagine that you did something like this and it was in Brussels or Paris or Barcelona or Ljubljana, and you can have a metadata set for your data set, and then we can all access it if we need to. We can contact you and just work with it from there. And this is just a thought. This is just an example of how a community effort, in this case, not another technical aspect. Not you don't need money for this. It's just another 10, 15 minutes, an hour for someone to make this, upload it in certain standards, and it's just a beneficial thing for everyone. And so that's the end of my talk. That's all I wanted to share. I want to thank you for having me, and I want to, of course, thank the Trump Foundation for sponsoring this presentation and my presentation on Friday with the Young Scientist Travel Award. Thank you. That's it.